Okay, let's get into this. We have spent the last few days just buried in the data, the match reports, all the coaches' interviews, and of course the power rankings for the first 14 rounds of AFT Dice Season 11.
We have.
And this isn't just a mid-season check-in, is it? This is a full-on deep dive into a competition that's been defined by just pure, unadulterated chaos.
It absolutely has been. And the sheer amount of material we've gone through, it's just staggering. So our mission today is pretty surgical, right?
Right.
We need to track these massive power shifts, the upsets that just completely redefine everyone's expectations week to week. And I think crucially, we need to understand this intense ladder compression that we're seeing.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen teams that were supposed to be perennial favorites just collapse.
Yeah.
And then supposed bottom feeders stage revivals that, frankly, defy logic.
And when you look at that initial snapshot, the word volatility,
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't even begin to cover it. We are dealing with a competition where, honestly, the top spot feels cursed.
Curse is a good word for it. Multiple teams have held that top spot, often for what? A round, maybe two.
And then they get smashed the next week.
Immediately. But the most staggering fact, and the thing for you, the listener, to really get your head around, is how razor sharp the gap is between the top contenders and the teams just fighting to make that finals bubble. The whole season has been this cycle of upsets and these high-scoring shootouts. And that means percentage, which is normally, something coaches worry about late in the year.
A secondary thought, maybe?
Exactly. It is suddenly the most critical mathematical burden.
Okay, let's nail that down right away. We usually talk points first. Why is percentage so hypercritical in this season?
It's the compression, plain and simple. We are seeing groups of 4, 5, sometimes even 6 teams all tied on the same points.
Wow.
And when that happens, percentage is the ultimate unforgiving tiebreaker. If you lose a game by, say, 3 points, it's painful, sure, but you can manage it. But if you lose by 50 or 60 points, and we've seen plenty of those, that percentage hit can drop you 3, maybe 4 spots down the ladder in a single weekend.
So it's not just one loss.
No, it's a multi-week psychological and mathematical burden. You have to repair that damage with massive blowout wins later on. It's what keeps this whole chaotic cycle spinning.
So we have 14 rounds of data, massive swings, zero margin for error, especially for those teams with poor percentage. The core question we need to answer is this. Which teams, if any, have shown the consistency and, I guess, the clutch performance needed to actually separate themselves from this chaos and lock in a final spot?
Because right now, that ladder suggests nobody is safe, not even the leaders.
Exactly.
Well, let's find out. Let's dive into the early mayhem where all those expectations were first set and then, brutally shattered.
Round 1. It set an immediate, brutal tone. It wasn't a starting gun. It was more like a demolition derby that just reset the entire preseason conversation.
Yeah, it did. We saw 2 massive statement wins that just shifted the power rankings on day 1.
Let's start with the first, and I think arguably the most shocking, given the rivalry and the expectations. Adelaide's 66-point showdown annihilation of Port Adelaide.
It was a demolition. Adelaide scored 20.88, that's 138, to Port's 10-point fall of 72. It wasn't just a big win, it was psychological warfare.
And the media coverage, I mean, it's fantastic here. It notes Port Adelaide went from being a consensus premiership favorite straight to 18th in the power rankings in 3 hours. I mean, you have to ask, was that a real indicator or was it just a massive overreaction?
It was almost certainly an overreaction, but that's the power of that showdown margin, isn't it?
Right.
What the Crows did was they just perfectly exploited Port Adelaide's high-risk, aggressive zone defense.
Well, so
They were just immaculate on the transition. The analysts highlighted Adelaide was #1 in the league for scoring from 4 half intercepts in that round. They suffocated Port's exit kicks and punished them with brutal efficiency.
So it looked like a list failure because the system was so badly exposed.
So early, yeah.
And that wasn't the only statement. You had Fremantle, who immediately signaled they were a different beast this year.
Absolutely. They travel east and obliterate Collingwood by 51 points at the MCG.
51 points. It's a 17-point 13, 115 to 9-point Neris, 64 thrashing on the road in the Premier's fortress. That's a huge psychological benchmark.
It completely flips the narrative on Fremantle, doesn't it? They were pegged as this defensively solid, maybe low-scoring side.
Right.
To score 115 at the G, they clearly retooled that forward structure. They were generating so much speed from halfback, and Collingwood's defense just couldn't handle it.
Well, those are the blowouts. The closest finish gave us a little taste of the chaos to come.
That was St Kilda's 6-point heist against the Brisbane Lions at the Gabba.
A huge win, 104-98. To steal one on the road like that in round one against a contender like the Lions, it suggested the Saints were bringing a whole new level of focus this year.
And that win was massive because it put the Lions, a team that relies so heavily on that home fortress advantage, it put them on notice. The stats showed St Kilda won because they out-tackled Brisbane by 15. That intensity just set the foundation for their early success.
So as we move through those early rounds, by the time we hit round 4, we've only got 2 teams left undefeated.
Yeah.
The 4-0 club.
Yep. Adelaide Crows and St Kilda, and they took very different paths to get there.
Adelaide's was just pure dominant.
Devastating dominance. We talked about the showdown, but they just kept racking up these massive scores. They were immediately labeled percentage monsters.
What were they at? Plus 94.
An astounding plus 94. And they seized sole ladder leadership in round 4 by beating Hawthorn pretty comfortably. They just looked like the most complete side in the competition.
And then you have St Kilda. Their 4-0 run felt different. It was built on grit, pressure, finding ways to win ugly.
Absolutely. They stayed perfect through round 4 by holding off a fast-finishing North Melbourne by just 10 points. The analysts called them the Pressure Kings, and they earned it. Their undefeated start was built on hard-nosed footy, not just raw firepower. A crucial distinction.
But the season wasn't really defined by the teams that didn't lose, was it?
No, not at all. It was defined by the shock that set the tone for all the mid-season chaos to come.
And that was the Western Bulldogs' redemption story in round 2.
Historic, really.
Let's get into this because this is where the volatility really kicks in. After a heartbreaking last-kick loss to Hawthorn in round 1, the Dogs needed a response.
And what a response. A staggering 63-point massacre of Geelong at GMHBA.
They won 123-60. Now, a 63-point win is huge anyway, but the reporting explicitly calls this the biggest win ever at Gardenia Park.
That's Geelong's fortress. So that win didn't just give the Dogs a redemption arc, it exposed this structural vulnerability in a club we just associate with, stability.
I have to ask, though, was that win a bit inflated? Some reports suggested Geelong had massive injury concerns that week, particularly through their back line. What did the stats say?
That's a fair question, but the stats back up the dominance. The Bulldogs' midfield, they were missing a few key players themselves, but they absolutely dominated contested possessions. They won that stat by 25.
Okay.
But the real key was their forward line efficiency. They delivered the ball so well that their goal-kicking accuracy, 19.9, was just elite. They were lethal. It was a massive tremor for the rest of the competition.
And we can't forget the original chaos merchants, Hawthorn.
The most entertaining, nerve-wracking start to the season.
Yeah, they were 3-0 by round 3, winning 3 straight thrillers, 7 points, 36 points, and then that 4-point miracle over Geelong. They were living on last-kick miracles.
Which takes a toll, doesn't it?
It has to. Mentally, it's great for morale, but statistically, you're running on fumes. You almost knew the crash was coming.
You did. That win over Geelong showed incredible mental fortitude, but it was totally unsustainable. Adelaide brought them back down to earth in round 4, proving that raw dominance beats constant clutch moments in the long run.
On the other side of that, you have the crisis clubs, the teams battling to stay relevant early on.
And Essendon was deepest in that hole, officially 0-4 by round 4. They'd show flashes of brilliance, but they just faded late in games time and again.
And the Sydney Swans. They spiraled to 0-3.
Yeah, that initial loss to Gold Coast was almost all down to accuracy, kicking 11.1. They finally got a win against the Dogs in round 4, but you could see the structural issues were there.
And we can't talk about early season crisis without diving into Melbourne's accuracy woes.
They were maybe the unluckiest 0-2 team in the league. The reports note they kicked a staggering 32.30 across the first 2 weeks and lost both games.
32 goals, 30 behinds. That's just, that's throwing away wins.
And the analysis suggested 70% of those behinds were from set shots, marks inside 50. This created a forward line that was called a shambles, not for lack of opportunity, but for this chronic breakdown in execution.
So round 4 ends. We've got 2 giants standing, Adelaide and St Kilda. But the foundation for the season has already been laid. Any team, no matter how dominant, can be exposed.
And the stage was perfectly set for the great collapse.
Round 5 was the moment the season just blew wide open. If round 1 was a tremor, round 5 was the whole building coming down.
It was a hat trick of high drama. The narrative of perfection just ended dramatically.
Let's start with the Dogs. Their nuclear offense returned. ending St Kilda's perfect run in that stunning 58-goal roof shootout at Marvel.
The Bulldogs kicked 22.14 in that game. They won 146 to 136. I mean, look at those scores. The Saints, the Pressure Kings, just couldn't maintain their structure on that fast deck.
So the Dogs proved they had the raw scoring power to beat anyone.
Anyone, anywhere. And with that, no team was undefeated. The season was officially wide open.
At the same time, Adelaide, our percentage monster, they also lost their perfect status.
Yep. Geelong, who'd been pantsed by the Dogs at home, they finally bounced back and handed Adelaide their first loss by 10 points at their fortress.
And that was a huge psychological win for the Cats, wasn't it? It dented that aura the Crows had.
It did. And Geelong showed the blueprint for future opponents. Slow a game down, force Adelaide to score from stoppages, not off transition.
And of course, round 5 gave us the Western Derby thriller.
A classic. Fremantles were flying, looking like a top 4 threat, but the reigning premiers, West Coast, they just showed true championship grit.
They stormed home, kicking 8 goals to 4 in the last quarter to win by 20, even though Freo was up by 28 points in the third.
That was the defining moment for West Coast's early season. Freo's defense just crumbled. West Coast dominated inside 50s 19-6 in that last quarter. It was a serious comeback.
Now we get to the real narrative flip of the midseason, the Essendon revival and the Port Adelaide meltdown.
Essendon's redemption it was incredible. They went from 0-5 wooden spoon favorites to a competitive 4-5 by round 8.
And it wasn't an accident. The reports suggest a tactical shift, a faster, high-risk kicking game.
But the peak of this, the real shock of the season, came in round 8.
The moment Essendon delivered a 68-point annihilation of Port Adelaide, 122-54.
For Port, who started as premiership favorites, this marked full meltdown mode. They conceded 122 points to a team that was dead last a few rounds ago.
The review suggested they were psychologically fractured.
They were, and Essendon, conversely, was the revival of the year. 4 wins in 6 games after that disastrous start, just pure momentum.
While Essendon was rising, the previously invincible top teams started to seriously stumble.
Adelaide's aura was heavily dented. 2 bad losses in 3 weeks. First, they were stunned by Sydney by 9 points at Adelaide Oval, a massive road upset.
Proving their home fortress was beatable.
Exactly. Then they were embarrassed by St Kilda by 42 points at Marvel.
What was the common thread in those losses? If they're built on transition, how did Sydney and St Kilda stop them?
Both teams forced them to kick long down the line instead of switching and using the corridor. Sydney played a high-risk press. St Kilda just returned to their pressure king fundamentals and dominated the tackle count. It showed the Crows might be flat-track bullies.
And the reigning premiers weren't immune either. West Coast had their own home slip-up.
Upset at Optus Stadium by the Gold Coast Suns by 20 points in round 8.
A massive road scalp for the Suns.
Huge, proving Gold Coast was becoming a legitimate threat. Their game plan was just pure stoppage dominance. They beat West Coast at their own game on their own ground.
Meanwhile, Geelong finally found some consistency.
They found their identity. They exploded for 21 goals in a win over St Kilda, then followed it up with a vintage 4-point nail-biter win over Richmond at the MCG. The old Cats had claws again.
So by the end of round 8, Adelaide is struggling, Port's in crisis, but Essendon, the Dogs, and Geelong are showing serious signs of life. The chaos was just getting started.
And as we move towards the back half of the season, the latter leadership became this actual verifiable carousel. The pressure of holding that #1 spot was just too much.
GWS Giants were the first to hit #1 in round 9. They had back-to-back big wins. They looked like they had a scoring explosion, talent everywhere. They were, briefly, the new team to beat.
Briefly is the key word. The curse of the #1 rankings struck fast.
So who was next?
Fremantle. They became the new ladder leader by round 11 after a truly massive 60-point demolition of the Gold Coast Suns at Optus.
And that scoreline, it tells a story, doesn't it?
Yeah.
21.7 to 9.19.
It really does. Fremantle showed elite scoring efficiency, while the Suns were terribly inaccurate. That result was called a percentage massacre, and it was the biggest win of the round. It vaulted Freo to the top spot with a huge percentage safety net.
While the ladder was spinning, the momentum shifts were just happening weekly, often tied to these huge statement wins. We have to talk about the Western Bulldogs again.
They continued to be the most terrifying demolition team in the league. After losing in round 8, they delivered the biggest belting of the season in round 9, a 64-point demolition of Collingwood.
125 to 61, and that's despite the Pies kicking 19 behinds. What does that tell you about the Dogs' approach?
It tells you they are the ultimate boomer bust team. When they turn it on, their transition speed is just unparalleled. They will annihilate you. That result just cemented their status as this terrifying high-variance opponent.
And St Kilda, after their own heavy loss in round 9, they delivered a brutal response.
A thrashing of Richmond by 45 points in round 11. They dropped 22 goals on a side known for its attack. It was a required statement win to regain their respect.
In a parallel act of destruction, chaos peaked when Hawthorn exploded for 22 goals and a 56-point massacre of Essendon.
That one officially ended the Dons' brief revival. It sent them back to reality. The Hawks showed they still had that serious offensive firepower when given time and space.
This period also defined the Road Warrior status for a few teams, especially West Coast.
The Eagles showcased their clutch status by stealing a one-point thriller against Port at Adelaide Oval in round 9. Final kick of the game.
A massive mental win on the road.
Huge. But then their road struggles against high transition teams were exposed again when they were shocked by the Bulldogs by 42 points at Marvel.
Why the drastic difference? 1-point win against Port, 42-point loss to the Dogs.
The Port win was a grind. It suited their big-bodied midfield. The Bulldogs' game was played at breakneck speed under the roof. The Dogs' speed just fundamentally exposes the Eagles' relative lack of leg speed.
And conversely, you have Gold Coast. Even after that percentage massacre from Freo, they were showing real progress.
Back-to-back road scalps in rounds 8 and 9. They stunned West Coast and Perth, then held off Melbourne at the MCG. The analysts noted the real breakout is happening for the Suns. They were finally beating good teams away from home.
So by round 11, we've had 3 different ladder leaders in 3 rounds. The gap between 1st and 8th is shrinking fast. The stage is set.
For the final compression, yeah. The chaos endgame.
And the end of this mid-season period delivered the most shocking outcomes yet.
The biggest shock of the entire season happened in round 13. Western Bulldogs delivered a 60-point humiliation of the ladder-leading Brisbane Lions at Marvel.
60 points. 113 to 53. I genuinely had to reread that report.
Yeah.
A 60-point humiliation feels like a statistical error. What did the Dogs expose in the Lions' structure?
They just choked their supply line. Brisbane relies so heavily on territory and quick ball movement, but the Dogs shut it all down. And the key stat, the Lions kicked 17 behinds.
Wow.
The pressure meant every shot was rushed, poorly executed. That loss just stripped the Lions of their aura, and their percentage dipped below 100%. A huge blow.
And that wasn't the only ladder leader to collapse. Collingwood, the upset specialist, delivered a massive one in round 12.
Dominated the ladder-leading Adelaide Crows from start to finish, won by 48 points.
And then, just 2 weeks later in round 14, West Coast demolished the Crows again, this time by 50 points in Perth.
And this is where the math of the season really hit the Crows. That second hiding, the 50-pointer, was a top 4 shock that just savaged their previously elite percentage.
It's fascinating. They're still percentage positive, but those 2 50-point defeats mean that safety net that defined their early dominance is just, it's gone.
Exactly. They entered this phase thinking they could absorb a loss. They absorbed 2 catastrophic ones. Their margin for error is now 0.
The margins were wild, but the closeness of the other games was even more intense.
Round 14 alone had 2 nail-biters. Collingwood snatched a 1-point thriller over St Kilda, 95-94. A massive final statement.
And Richmond and GWS played out a 54-goal classic,
where Richmond just edged them by 3 points. And we saw it all through this phase. Sydney won a 4-point derby. West Coast beat Geelong by a point. When you have so many teams winning or losing by a single point, you understand how volatile the ladder really is.
Every kick is literally determining ladder position.
And that brings us to the crux of it, the bubble fight. After round 14, the ladder compression is just extreme.
Let's break it down. There's a massive tier of teams locked on 36 points.
That's right. The expert analysis shows 6 teams are tied on 36 points. Brisbane, Adelaide, West Coast, Richmond, St Kilda, and Collingwood.
6 teams.
All battling for top 6 spots. Their final seeding is going to be determined almost entirely by who can deliver a couple of high-margin wins to repair their percentage.
And the fight for the final spots, that 28-point bubble, is even tighter.
5 teams are tied on 28 points: Melbourne, Fremantle, Hawthorn, Port Adelaide, and Gold Coast. And the percentage separating 8th place from 12th is just minuscule but critical.
We saw massive movements in round 14 alone that illustrate this perfectly.
Melbourne surged up 4 spots after a big upset over Geelong. Gold Coast surged by upsetting the Dogs, moving them to a very live 7-7 record.
And Fremantle fell hard.
Yeah, 22-point loss to Carlton, and Adelaide was reeling from that 50-point hiding. Every loss is just so consequential now.
Speaking of unexpected, we have to note the late surges from teams we thought were dead and buried. Carlton, at 4-10, exploded for 21 goals to smash Fremantle.
That showed they were finding late-season life, but that result was a total wrecking ball for Fremantle's percentage and momentum. Carlton played the role of the spoiler perfectly.
And the Gold Coast Suns, they just continued their momentum by upsetting the Dogs.
That win was huge. The Suns are now 7-7. They are a genuine dark horse finals contender for the first time in a long time.
So here we are, 3 rounds to go. Round 15 is set up to be pure drama with these Australia Day blockbusters.
The key matchups are massive for seeding. Richmond versus Collingwood at the MCG, both tied on 36 points. The winner could lock in a top 4 spot.
And Adelaide versus Melbourne. The Crows are desperate for a percentage repair job, and Melbourne needs to solidify their spot in the 8.
For those in the bubble, we have 2 critical predictions based on the data. The lock of the round is Fremantle. The models predict a 50-plus point win over North Melbourne.
And that 50-plus margin is everything for them, isn't it?
They need that massive percentage booster to climb out of that crowded bubble. They cannot afford to let North keep it close.
And the upset alert is Gold Coast over Hawthorn.
Given the Suns' momentum, beating the chaos-prone Hawks would solidify Gold Coast's 7-7 status and could knock Hawthorn out of the finals bubble entirely. The stakes just couldn't be higher.
We've detailed the chronological chaos, but let's spend some serious time on the pure statistical trends that define this season. The sheer scoring power. I mean, it feels like defense took a holiday.
The consistency of high scores is staggering. We saw the Richmond GWS 54-goal classic. St Kilda and Gold Coast produced a 57-goal barn burner in round 2. And of course, the Dogs Saints 58-goal shootout.
So why are these scores so high? Is it tactical? Rule changes.
It's a combination, but tactically, the elite teams are forcing high percentage shots. The analysis shows that teams like the Dogs in Richmond are in the top 4 for marks inside 50. They're delivering the ball to forwards in space, not just bombing it long.
And beyond those classics, certain teams hit that 20-goal mark multiple times, showing where the firepower really is.
Oh, absolutely. Richmond did it. Melbourne did it twice. The Dogs hit 22 goals. Freo hit 21 twice. West Coast, even Carlton, despite their record, exploded for 21 goals against Freo. If you can occasionally drop 140-plus points, you are never truly out of the race.
But if the offense is volatile, the margins are razor thin. Let's talk about the frequency of one-point finishes.
The one-point specialists have been busy, and it points to this extreme competitive balance. We've had 6 one-point finishes scattered across the 14 rounds.
6 one-point games. That level of closeness is just, it's incredible. What does it suggest about the teams involved?
2 things. First, the teams that are regularly in these tight finishes, West Coast, Collingwood, have exceptional mental fortitude, but maybe lack the firepower to blow teams out.
And the second?
The teams that lose these close games, like Port Adelaide, who lost 3 one-point thrillers, they suffer a catastrophic psychological blow. They're competitive enough to be in the fight, but they're fundamentally failing on execution in the final 90 seconds.
Let's talk statistical anomalies, the percentage wars. Adelaide, despite those shocking losses, still held an elite percentage of 107.5 after round 14.
That's a huge anomaly. It means that when Adelaide won, they were consistently blowing teams out, which compensated for those shocking losses. Their wins were large enough to maintain that safety net.
Meanwhile, Melbourne's perennial problem of inaccuracy just persisted.
They kicked 19.14 and lost in round 1. Sydney's downfall started the same way, kicking 11.19 in a loss. These are results where the team was competitive enough to create chances, but the failure to convert ultimately cost them the points.
Finally, let's reflect on the rock-bottom teams.
North Melbourne is officially the wooden spoon favorite at a dire 2-12, struggling for consistency across 4 quarters, which is a classic sign of a rebuilding club.
But the most dramatic decline has to be Port Adelaide. Premiership favorite, 66-point showdown loss, full crisis mode after the Essendon loss. And yet, by round 14, they are still desperately battling in that 28-point bubble at 7-7.
It's a truly bizarre trajectory, and it illustrates the nature of the season perfectly. Even teams that collapse spectacularly are never truly out of the finals fight because of the sheer volatility of the competition. Port is hanging on purely because the teams above them keep handing out 50-point hidings to each other.
So to summarize this entire mid-season review.
We started with two undefeated teams, Adelaide and St Kilda, showing two distinct paths to victory. Dominance versus pressure.
Right.
Yet by round 14, with only 3 rounds left, the latter is hyper-compressed. The major theme has been chaos teams like Collingwood, Melbourne, and the Western Bulldogs surging into contention, mainly by delivering massive, unexpected upsets.
It is a complete free-for-all. Every team from 1st to 13th still has realistic finals hopes. The season has been defined by these spectacular collapses. The Lions by 60, the Crows taking 2 hidings of nearly 50 points. It's annihilation followed by resurrection.
So as we look ahead to these final 3 rounds, the question isn't who wins the minor premiership, it's who survives the percentage wars.
Given the season has been defined by these spectacular collapses of ladder leaders, here is the final provocative thought for you to mull over. Which team, currently holding a top 4 spot, that's the Lions, Crows, Eagles, or Tigers, is most vulnerable to sliding out completely before the finals begin? Every loss is a potential 50-point percentage blow, and based on the last 14 rounds of pure, unadulterated chaos, absolutely no one is safe.